We'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Flag of the United States of America and to the
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, at 7 p.m. on September 22nd, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I'd like to request everyone, please silence their cell phones or put them on vibrate as to not be an interruption in the meeting. And I thank you for indulging. And we'll move on to roll call. And I would request everyone sign in. Again, if everybody hasn't noticed, we have IT staff here with us today. We have moved so that the IP address that you'll be using will be the same whether it's from home or whether it's from here. The same IP address will be used all the time, which was the not the local, the remote. So it would have been the remote IP address in both places. And if you are logged in and recognized, that is outstanding. All right, and we will move on to item number 6, and I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us, including the viewing audience, and thank them for their attention. And we'll move on to item 8, education presentation and or reports. And we have I apologize, I missed item number 7, and that's 15-minute public comment, and I had no one address the chair or the clerk to do public comment, and so according to our rules, we'll move on then to item number 8. And item number 8A is department head reports and roles and responsibilities. And we have with us first Ms. Kim Weber, and she will be providing us an overview of McDevco. Kim, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Weber. I'm the Executive Director of McDevco, and I'm going to share with you today how we correlate to the Marathon County Board and what we've been working on. So we have 3 pillars at McDevco as identified in our strategic plan that we have as an organization. And I'm going to talk through those 3 strategic pillars, but I'm also going to share with you updates on things as they relate to your specific strategic plan within Marathon County, where McDevco is cited as a partner. So I'll be talking about those items as I go through the presentation. So the 3 pillars that we have as an organization, we have gap financing, which I'll elaborate on a little bit in case you haven't heard of that, entrepreneurial education and incubation, as well as municipality connection and memberships. So the first that we focus on as an organization is gap financing. And for those of you that don't know, McDevco administers gap funds to new or expanding businesses within Marathon County. So what is gap financing? Gap financing truly helps those businesses with maybe a lower equity pool get some gap funds in partnership with a primary lender to start some projects that maybe need a little bit of help. Maybe the borrower doesn't have as much of a down payment or as much collateral to use when they go to the bank. So that's where gap financing is really critical to help a lot of these projects that are new or expanding within our community that add value. So that's where McDevco comes in. We administer the funds. We have a Marathon County revolving loan fund in addition to other funds we administer, but we have a $1 million revolving loan fund with Marathon County where we're using those funds to, again, help help deliver on things that are in your strategic plan, prosperous county, job creation, adding value for our community. So that's really what our loan fund looks to do, and we handle that internally at McDevco. In the last couple of months, we've been able to lend $147,000 of that fund just in the last couple of months. And we've seen a lot of positive traction coming out of COVID as we shift folks from applying for our grant program, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to traditional financing and starting with some business startups or expansions within the community. We've been able to really get the word out about our programs and what we do in the realm of gap financing by partnering with a lot of our local financial institutions, making sure that we're available for those borrowers that are going to the banks, and the banks are maybe saying, hey, we're not really sure that you have enough equity in this project. We're trying to get involved early so we can use those funds to help start those business projects that are going to benefit our community. We also have been working out of banks. I've been doing information sessions with our lenders. We've been talking to our educational students about what we offer as they go through our programs to start their business, which I'll expand on a little bit further, as well as the tenants that we have within the incubator. The business incubator. So a lot of different tactics that we've used to really get this fund moving. And we've seen a lot of positive traction with a lot of loan conversations in progress before the end of the year. So that's very exciting. We're also working with CPZ on the POUTS loan program. More to come there, but McDevco is working and having active conversations about how we can be a partner in administering that. We offer a lot of entrepreneurial resources. So what does that mean? It means business education. And it means business incubation. So we offer a lot of programs at the Entrepreneurial Center, which we do receive $40,000 from the county for our educational programs. McDevco's flagship program started 2 weeks ago. It's a 16-week Gears Certificate of Excellence program. It's a 16-week program that we have mentors from all over the community, those that are business owners or business experts. They teach a segment of business each week. So the first 3 weeks, we talk about lean canvas. What does a business plan look like? Then we'll dive into accounting principles and how you write that as it relates to your business plan, insurance, HR, sales tax. We go into all of those things so that business owners looking to start a business, or maybe that started a business that need a little bit more education, can have a high-level overview and really make the right choice when choosing to start their business. Maybe they choose to delay their project a little bit so they can get a few more items in order. Maybe they decide they're ready to go, and they work with McDevco for business incubation space or gap financing. That's the idea. We also offer a variety of other programs. 423 entrepreneurs and business owners have attended our programs in the last couple of years. We have 35 active mentors and business leaders in the community that serve as our mentors. In spring of 2021, we had 17 attendees for that Gears program I just talked about. In fall of 2021, we had 20 attendees, and then the course that just kicked off last week, we had 17 attendees. We try to really keep it around that 17 to 20 mark so that they can get a lot of value-added time, a lot of Q&A, and then at the end, we really spend a lot of time listening to their business pitches in the dolphin tank, because we're nicer than sharks, where they're getting real-life feedback on their business plan from business professionals. 460 entrepreneurs have been assisted in various aspects of business through our programs over the last 2 years. And we're very proud of the work we've done. It's grown from 1 in 10 entrepreneurs to starting a business to 3 in 10, and that's really exciting for us. Another aspect of entrepreneurial development is our business incubators. So McDevco is hired by the Entrepreneurial and Education Center Board to manage. It's called the EEC for short, so you're going to hear me refer to it as that. The EEC, which is in the industrial park. So on North 72nd Avenue, McDevco has an office space within the business incubator, and we manage the tenancy and leases. The idea is businesses come to us that are new, or maybe they're transitioning out of their home for an office or manufacturing space. The idea is they incubate there, and then if the ecosystem works as it should, they come to us for gap financing, and we find them a permanent home somewhere within Marathon County. McDevco started this partnership in January of 2021. At that time, occupancy was 61%. I'm very proud to report we reported 82% in August, and I only have a handful of offices left. Manufacturing is full, and we have a wait list that we're starting for that space. So we've incorporated this into a lot of different programs that we have. We give a lot of tours to our students going through the incubator. And then the growth that we've experienced from 61 to 82% has truly been out of educating the community, bringing in the chambers of commerces, bringing in a lot of those organizations, and the word of mouth has really spread. So we'll look to manage and lease out those last few offices, but that's a really big part of what we do. And then the last piece I'll talk about is Municipality Connections. So McDevco acts as the conduit for connecting municipalities. We have roughly 59 municipalities in Marathon County, and McDevco is the home of the municipality agreement. It's an agreement in place to ensure that we all operate as municipalities and work together as businesses look to grow and expand within our community and hopefully stay or move to Marathon County. Through the pandemic, McDevco was the facilitator of monthly municipality meetings. When the pandemic happened, there were a lot of questions about what was going on. So McDevco brought together all the municipalities and the health department to keep that weekly communication, it was weekly going. And then we've since transitioned to quarterly in-person meetings at the Entrepreneurial Center to really get a lot of that positive conversation going about how we can collaborate, what we're navigating as communities together, and how we can maybe streamline some things. We also help partner with Synergy on the Developers Familiarization Tour, collecting available sites within the county and helping showcase that to developers from all over the Midwest to show what Marathon County has to offer. And we continue to actively support our municipalities by, I always say, being the conduit that brings them the resources they need to help grow their communities. So we're very proud of the work that we do within those three pillars. And a lot of the items that I shared with you, I provided in the June 2022 update on the progress we've made as it relates to the Marathon County Strategic Plan and the specific items that McDevco was asked to work on as an organization. I think that's all I have.
Okay, is there any questions for Kim? Either you put them all to sleep or you gave them all the information they needed, Kim. Thank you so very much for a great presentation.
Awesome. Oh, is this on? Feel free to schedule a tour with me at the Entrepreneurial Center if you haven't been out there. If you want to learn more about gap financing, I'd be happy to educate you. It's been a really fun and rewarding to work with the fund that we have in partnership with Marathon County and to help manage the incubator. We're making a lot of positive traction. So if you want to know more, I can give you more details. Come to my office. Would be happy to host a tour. So,
Again, thank you, Kim. And next we have with us from the UW Extension, Jason Hausler. In his former job was the regional director for the area, and now he is the assistant dean for the UW-Madison Division of Extension. Jason, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Marathon County Board. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, in my... Is it? There we go. Let's start again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. Pleasure to be here this evening with you. To give you an update on the local Division of Extension office you have here in Marathon County, I've been serving as the area director for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I served as an educator in Dunn County. So I'm originally from Wausau, so it's nice to be able to serve this area. But as Chair Gibbs mentioned, I've assumed a new role as of September 1st. So department heads that are in the room this evening, you'll hear the announcement tomorrow, actually, on the department head meeting. So I'm going to kind of go along in the presentation to keep myself on track because as Administrator Leonard likes to say, I talk about extension like I talk about my kids. I love it, and I can go on and on forever. So what we do, our purpose is that we teach, learn, lead, and serve, connecting the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the resources of all the institution of the UW system to the people where they live, work, and recreate. And so the information of the system belongs to the people. We embody the people, and that's what we're all about. So, and we transform our communities and the lives of the people that we interact with on a daily basis. So we embody the Wisconsin idea that, again, that the university resources belong to the people, and this is one mechanism in which we do that. If you take nothing away from this evening, take away this slide, please, and that we are a statewide connected organization. We have offices in 71 of 72 counties, and so if there's a resource that you need and want access to, if we don't have it in our local office via an educator, we can tap into other specialists, either at our flagship campus at Madison, or we have regional specialists out of UW Stevens Point, based at River Falls, Platteville. They're all extension appointments, and we can leverage them at any moment. So we can bring in state specialists if there's a need for that. So again, I want to reiterate, we are connected, even though that we may not have a local educator that can work on some of those things, we can tap into the network, and that's the benefits of the university. So roles and responsibilities. As I looked at kind of preparing for this evening, we provide educational services to address the goals that are outlined in the strategic plan. So 3.3 talks about every child makes it to adulthood with caring adults and successful opportunities. 5.3 or 5.2 is strategic of the plan, talks about land use, and so through natural resource allocation, agriculture practices, sound land use planning. And then 8.7 we've been involved in. We're not labeled in that, but that's the high-speed broadband. And so working with Supervisor Robinson, the broadband task force, we still actually do provide administrative support via our office and Kathy Johnson for the broadband task force. We continue to work with stakeholders such as yourselves as board supervisors and our other county partners. So, for instance, Kim was talking about some entrepreneur things for young people, and so we've been in touch with McDevco in the past on some of our youth programming to really get at what are the emerging needs in our community and how do we address them together. And then lastly, be part of the Marathon County team to promote, be the healthiest, safest, and most prosperous. So we're always working with administration on what we can do and kind of leveraging the network, as I mentioned, each and every day. So it's maybe hard to read on the screen, but I want to this speaks to, we do a continuous check-in with our oversight committee, and this was done in 2021 on what as board supervisors are we seeing and how can we in extension address them. And so this was a mind map that came out of that committee that has really helped to drive the work of our local staff along with the strategic plan, because we know that everything that is a need in our community is maybe not found in that plan, and so we want to be responsive to those needs as well. And this presentation will be made available at request too. So our local staff, we have 2 individuals in our ag institution or our ag programming. So we have Heather Schlesser, who's our dairy educator. She's been providing programming in the fields of artificial insemination and reproductive health for those farms. Marathon County is still in the top 5 of dairy producing counties. And so it's nice to have that specialist available locally for those farmers that want to utilize those resources. Emerging farmers and emerging crops. And alternative forages, that's always the piece too. You have your corn, your wheat, and hay and those sort of things, but alternative forages in that area. And then emerging farmers. Women in farming is growing exponentially. And so working with those new farmers is what she's working on. The horticulture educator, Janelle Ware, years ago, prior to my time, this is probably 2014-ish time frame, there was a desire to really work with incarcerated populations to get them tools and resources and some therapy to make sure they don't, to reduce recidivism of those that are getting in the jails. And hort therapy was an emerging field at the time. It's still actually one of the most trending ways of rehabilitation. And so Janelle has a focus on that, among other things. We have a lot of small horticulture producers in the fields of specialty crops, your small CSAs, blueberries, strawberries, those sort of things. But she focuses a lot of her time and attention to therapeutic horticulture. Actually, Thomas Street in Grand, you may see the sign, extensions on that sign. It's the Gaining Grounds Garden, and working in that space. And that's a partnership with the city of Wausau for that space. I'm sad to report that we got word that they'll be developing that site in the near future. Well, 2024 is the projection, but we've been asked to vacate that, so we're finding a new space. But we do partner with, or she does partner with veterans, addict services, and a lot of other organizations on that hort therapy program. Positive youth development, this is the one that people know most often. That's our 4-H program. I guess this speaks to objective 3.2 of the 3.3 of the plan. Making sure every young person makes it to adulthood with the supports that they need. So fourth largest 4-H program in the state. Marathon County continues to grow. And that's a credit to our staff, Holly and Jasmine, who you see pictured there. And just this summer, they reached over 1,600 youth and young people in their summer programming. And that's, gosh, I'm glad that we were able to still do, or to get back to in-person programming with those young people. And Supervisor Cip out there in the county fair and working with that and a lot of other opportunities. So generally speaking, this is the one that people, when they think of our office, they think it's the 4-H office, and that's only one of the pieces that we offer. Food-wise is the part of our office that is 100% federally funded. That goes through the state the state, my words aren't coming this evening, I apologize. Department of Health Services, thank you. And so it's 100% federally funded and delivered on the local level through our educators, and it's the SNAP Ed dollars that come down. And there's no cost to these. There is a cost. It's technology in an office, right? But otherwise, the rest comes out of that grant. And then something to be of note of the last 3 years, they've gleaned. What does that mean? That's working with the farmers market and food that would go to waste. They've gleaned it on the spot, and they've taken it and delivered it to food pantries and other organizations so it doesn't go to waste. And so kind of those systems in place for them. And then natural resources, we don't have a natural resources educator that's primarily serving Marathon County, but Chris Tiles, who you see pictured here, she's a regional educator, a regional program manager, excuse me. And so she leverages, again, talking about the network, leverages natural resources education here for Marathon County. And a couple of things that are listed there, working with farmer-led watershed groups, the EPIC group. There was a partnership with the university, which you may have talked about in the past, and so the Fenwood Creek Project, and then the Learn About Your Land, people that buy property know how to assess their timber, what animals and habitats are there, and how to really make that come alive. And then the last thing I'll leave you with this evening is we always get questions about, I think every department does, about where your funding comes from, and I like to say it's the four-legged stool. And the first being Marathon County, your financial support to our office is greatly appreciated, and without that we wouldn't be able to provide the services that we do. But we also leverage our state funds through the state of Wisconsin, through the university system. It's a partnership. It's roughly a 50-50 split between Marathon County and the state of Wisconsin. And we also leverage federal dollars, our Smith-Lever dollars. That's through the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. The state gets around $10 million, and that's for local education through our cooperative extension network. And then last, we're always writing grants and different funding streams, and we continue to, as every department, find and explore those things and bring them into Marathon County. So I could go on and on. There's probably more or some things that I've missed, but I just appreciate the time to be in front of you. So thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm entertaining questions.
Oh, open it up for questions. Any questions for Jason? Very good. Thank you, Jason.
Thank
you
you.
for a great presentation. And thank you for your continued support and work with Marathon County on the extension. Next, we have with us from the Solid Waste Department, Dave Hagenbuscher. He happens to be the Solid Waste Operations Manager. So, Mr. Hagenbuscher, please.
Alrighty, thank you everybody. Mic on, we're good? Okay, thank you everybody. My name is Dave Hagenbuscher, Operations Manager with Marathon County Solid Waste Department. Been with the department for 12 years now. Started as a student going to UWSP. Earned my degree in Soil and Waste Resource Management. I oversee all the disposal operations and recycling programs that serve our community. So let's start and talk about cell phones. Cell phones are a huge part of our lives. It's the first thing I look at when I wake up, and oftentimes the last thing I look at when I go to bed. Cell phones are a modern part of society, right? A lot of us can't function without them. So what happens when that cell phone breaks or we need that replacement? I think most of us can say that we quickly run out and we get that replacement. It's how we stay connected with our family, our friends, our relatives, our jobs. So what happens to all those broken cell phones or all those cell phones that we don't want anymore? If you're like me, raise your hand. You probably have a drawer of about 4 or 5 of them sitting at home, am I right? Probably waiting for a rainy day to take them somewhere and probably recycle them. Believe it or not, before 2009, these were all going into the landfill. Big deal, right? Well, when we look at a cell phone, we really break it down. These are elements that were harvested from the earth, that were mined. We're talking about small bits of gold, copper, aluminum, mercury, all these different things that add up that are then being put into a landfill, never to be touched again, or at least very, very difficult to ever be accessed in the future. So why am I telling you all this? Not trying to make you feel bad. Like I said, I'm just as guilty. Sometimes I carry around 2 phones. I'm just as guilty of it. I'm telling you because I want you to think differently about the waste resources that we use, about the natural resources that we use, and to get you educated and help me to make the best decisions for our community. Not a lot of people think about their waste. It's my job to do so. It's my job to think about all your waste. When we throw something away, a lot of people don't really know what that is. Believe it or not, there are not magic garbage fairies that wave wands and make it disappear. Away is a place. Where is that? For most of us, it's Ringel. Between Ringel and Hatley, north side of Highway 29, is the Marathon County Solid Waste Department. In 1976, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act was passed, giving local government the authority over solid waste regulation. In 1978, the county purchased this land from Consolidated Papers, and in 1980, we opened up the first landfill. We have 75 acres of landfill footprint and another 30 acres in the works. What goes into that exactly? We're talking about 800 tons a day, and that makes up about 4.5 pounds from each of us, from each person throughout Marathon County and a few surrounding areas. Of that 4.5 pounds, we're talking about 30% of it is organics or food material, 20% plastics, 20% paper, and the rest of it a mix of wood, metal, and other debris. What happens if we don't have it? What's the alternative? Well, you can see this picture. It's pretty ugly. If we don't have a system, it quickly gets out of hand. Does everybody remember the Cuyahoga River in Ohio that was on fire many years ago? We don't want to get to a point like that. So it becomes a necessity for human health and the environment, and that's why we're here. We're here to provide the community with an integrated resource management system to protect human health and the environment. Part of our goals involve maximizing the economic opportunities. And I'm not just talking about the landfill, I'm talking about the relationships that we build with municipalities, with the townships, the cities, the villages. And not only them, but the businesses and organizations that we all are part of. The Kobe and Kobe, Abbeyland, Kraft, Marathon Cheese, Great Lakes Cheese, all these huge manufacturers in our area that need capacity for waste disposal to function. We also look at recycling, diversion, and alternatives. Why are these important? Because we don't want egg plastic burning out in the rural areas of Marathon County. We don't want tires ending up in the lakes and in the Wisconsin River. We want to be able to take shingles. We want to be able to take concrete, divert those, and turn them back into useful sources like new roads. Number 5 of what we do is we influence state policy. What does that mean exactly? Okay, let's take a look at those cell phones again. Every one of those has a lithium-ion battery. And right now, there's nothing stopping us from taking that lithium-ion battery and tossing it right in the trash. There are no laws that prevent that. Lead-acid batteries, yes, but lithium-ions, no. What happens when the lithium-ion battery is crushed? That's what happens. We get fires. We have exothermic reactions when they short circuit, and it could be anywhere from 3 minutes to 3 hours. So at the end of the day, we always hope our operators do their job and make sure they don't see any smoldering areas. What you should know about Solid Waste Department is we are an enterprise business. So we use all of our tipping fees to create our budget. And everything that we do operationally and all of our programs is paid for by the tipping fees from our department. The Solid Waste Management Board is our governing body, so they help us make all of our policy decisions. We have 9 members. Of that, we have many of you, county board supervisors. We also have 2 citizen members and then 1 representative from the town of Ringel. Organizational structure for decision making and policy is as follows. We have the Solid Waste Board, which then moves on to the Environmental Resources Committee, which then moves on to the County Board of Supervisors. Examples of items that you might hear about from solid waste might be an FTE request for a full-time employee, or maybe a siting agreement, any major projects that involve financial or other departments. Because we often do a lot of times work with those other departments very closely. We work with the health department on take back of mercury. We work with emergency management on debris planning in a disaster. We work with the sheriff's department on the medication drop box program, and also sharps collection and household hazardous waste. So all these things that you've probably seen out in the community are likely part of what we do. So contrary to what some people might have thought of us as, we are more than a dump. Administrator Leonard made that mistake once, and we will never let him live it down. We are much more than that. As you can see, we have a number of recreational opportunities at our site. We partnered with the Central Wisconsin Off-Road Cycling Coalition, and it's really put the Ringgold Trails on the map, not only in Wisconsin, but really throughout the Midwest. There are people traveling from all over, riding these mountain biking trails that are really, really well built. And we also host the National Ice Age Trail Alliance for a number of different events each year. So that brings us back to why are we here? We're here to provide support to the community. We're here to provide that cost-effective and convenient disposal option while also offering those recreational opportunities for the people that I serve and the people that you represent. So if you want to learn more about why we aren't a dump and what else we do in our highly engineered, highly regulated, and highly managed facility, please reach out to me. Let me know, and we can set up a tour. We give tours, I would say, probably 2 or 3 times a month, ranging anywhere from 1 or 2 people all the way up to 30. Multiple groups have come out, and it's always very enjoyable telling the story of solid waste. Because many, many years ago, we've situated landfills way out in the country, away from what we do, and we've been a bit shameful of them. We've tried to remove that veil of shame, and we work very hard to do so that essentially we can all understand what the impact of the choices that we have. So there's my information. You can also visit us on our website, and you can contact us on Facebook. Tons of information out there, so please reach out to me and help me in making Marathon County the healthiest, safest, most prosperous county in the state. Any questions?
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? No, I don't see any, Dave. Thank you so very much for a great presentation. And so we will move on to standing committee chairs or designees. Any reports from standing committee chairs or designees? Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lance was trying to block me. So just a quick update at the Infrastructure Committee on September 1st. We had a discussion with Commissioner Griesbach about whether using ARPA funds may affect the calculation of our GTA funds. He had received information stating that those funds basically would be a wash and should not affect the calculation of the general transportation aid. We then had a discussion about large assembly ordinance. Administrator Leonard gave some background on this ordinance, which is under Chapter 12. The discussion started back in 2019, and because of COVID, it was kind of put way back on the back burner. At that time, before COVID, we were looking for to develop some direction to staff at Marathon County Sheriff's Department, the Highway Department, and Parks on what services they should be responsible for if somebody would want to have a marathon or a big party or get-together that would require possibly closing down a road or using some of our parks. It was suggested that we should possibly form a small task force with one member from Infrastructure, Public Safety, ERC, and Parks, which could work with staff to bring back some recommendations to these committees. Due to the budget process, we decided that we would start working on this further after November when the budget is completed. Also, Administrator Leonard advised us that the current ordinance we have may be illegal. So we're going to have to look at possibly revising that or eliminating it. We then reviewed 3.8 in the comp plan, which covers diversity, equity, and inclusion. This has been asked a couple times by Supervisor Zhang. I was not able to come up with any ideas or suggestions looking at the responsibilities of infrastructure and the 20 duties and responsibilities. Supervisor Zhang did send some questions to myself on 3.8, reference what he felt Infrastructure Committee could deal with. It was mostly that dealt with technology. And Administrator Leonard did inform us on some progress that is being made on some of those questions that Supervisor Zhang had asked. Jim Griesbach reminded the committee that the North Central Region Commissioners Committee meeting is October 28th, 2022 at Country Air in Stratford. We received a quarterly Highway Commission safety meeting report from Kevin Lang, and Supervisor Robinson then gave a quick update on broadband expansion efforts, dealing with LTE services, which they thought were going to be available in Marathon County, but may not be available, but Bug Tussle stepped up to offer some services in those areas. So that covers infrastructure. Are there any questions?
Any questions for the Vice Chairman? Okay, moving on. Anybody, any other standing committee chairs or Supervisor Shafinsky?
I wasn't sure if we were using.
We're, yes.
Mr. Chairman, my question to you is.
You still got to use a, you still got to use a mic because it doesn't pick up.
That one's dead. We have a green light? We have a green light. Wonderful. So my question is, can you provide some detail relative to the discussion on the diversity and equity discussions that's going on? Just going over and saying, hey, we had some issues presented. I think we need, given the hot button nature of that, we need some detail.
Yes. Well, briefly, there was some discussion about the website for Marathon County and how difficult it is to maneuver through, and some different options for different languages. We did talk about some signage at the airport, and Supervisor Dickinson had some information on some new technology with phones. So like I said, it mostly dealt with technology. I'm not sure if Administrator Leonard recalls what, there was a couple other questions that he had brought up, but it was all technology.
If it's helpful, I can send out a link to the meeting information, and I can flag when the discussion took place, but off the top of my head, I know I provided an update, as the Vice Chair referenced, on the status of our new website update, because that was one of the technology pieces. For those of you that don't know, if you've been to the current Marathon County website, you can see it's really its architecture and its design is a design that has been long-standing. I like to say if you need to write a book report about Marathon County, we have the website for you. It's a lot of Britannica and not much Amazon. We want to move in the other direction where it's a way for the public to get service. So that was the update I gave relative to the website. Also a question about wayfinding, as the vice chairman referenced, and we're learning a lot with respect to the North Central project. We have some wayfinding pieces that Jerry Klein and his team are working on with the new the conference center remodel and relocation, as well as the project in general. So we'll be utilizing some of those lessons, hopefully, in other buildings to be consistent. And as was referenced, Supervisor Dickinson provided some information on some tools that are available to us on the same devices that Mr. Hagenbusher referenced, our cell phones. But I'd be happy, Mr. Chairman, if it's acceptable to you, to send out a link to the recording of the meeting with a timestamp as to when that conversation began.
By all means, and the clerk has informed me she had an open records request that starts at about minute 40 in the meeting. So, any other discussion or any other questions for the vice chairman before we proceed on to other standing committee chairs or designees? Okay, any other standing committee chairs or designees? Supervisor Robinson?
Very briefly, you're going to hear about the capital improvement program later from Deputy Administrator Holman. We're going to be taking that up on Tuesday of next week. I just wanted to give you a brief update on health insurance. We were looking at an 8% increase through GHD, our contractor, and as a result of that, authorized going out and exploring self-insurance. And subsequent negotiations cut that increase in over half. So we are staying with GHT with about a 3.9% increase in health insurance premiums for next year.
Okay, any questions for Supervisor Robinson? Okay, any other chairmans or designees reports? Okay, we will move on. Item number 8C, presentation of the county board and or committee about committee meeting minutes and best practices. And I've asked the Corp Council to give us a little bit of history and maybe explain what best practices are as far as and has been adopted by the executive committee and this board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk a little bit about basically why your minutes look the way they do, what guiding principles, legal principles, and best practices lead us to have those minutes developed in the way they are. So first of all, I think it's important to look at what the purpose of minutes are. Minutes establish the official record of the proceedings of a particular body, and what they're meant to do is capture the substance of any official action that was taken by the body. If you look at Wisconsin Statute 98501 sub 6, which I'm sure all of you are just going to go and do right after this meeting, it talks about what substance means. So when you talk about substance of the official action, what does that actually mean? And what it defines that as is essential items of the official action taken, including the subject matter of any motions, the persons making and seconding the motions, and any roll call votes. So the basics of what minutes capture is if a body is taking an official action, what was the action and what was the vote? We're also guided by Robert's Rules of Order. Those are our rules of procedure. They have some brief outlines and best practices on what minutes should look like. Minutes should state what the name of the organization is, what kind of meeting took place, where and when the meeting took place, who the presiding officer was, who else was present, and who was actually taking the minutes. I think it's important to remember when we're talking about minutes and what they're intended to capture is, again, they're supposed to capture the official action that was taken. They're not a transcript of a meeting. In fact, that would be contrary to the purpose of taking minutes. If you try to transpose what happened in a meeting, you're taking an objective document, so the minutes are an objective reading of what the motion was and what the vote was and what the result of the vote was, and you're turning it into a subjective recitation of what the discussion was. There's risk of not including certain parts of the discussion. using incorrect phrasing of the discussion. So the best practice guidelines that Robert's Rules suggest and Wisconsin Counties Association suggests, and I suggest as your legal counsel, is our minutes should really focus on what the body did, not what the body said. So what motions were passed, what the vote was, when the meeting took place. So that's really the spirit of what our minutes are intended to capture. That's the framework that Kim and her staff have taken on since they've undertaken meeting minutes for this board as well as all your committees. And that's the background.
And I would be remiss not to say that the executive committee and actually rules review has discussed this many times. In fact, one of the things that led to having meetings recorded was to have an accurate reflection available to the public about what actually took place by the meeting, so that somebody can go in and listen to the meeting, exactly hear verbatim what took place and what discussed, rather than trying to capture that in the minutes. And so that's why the executive committee and this board approved funding to have all of the standing committees recorded and provided along with the full board's recordings. Questions? Supervisor Gisselman.
I thank Supervisor Morash for bringing this to the executive committee last month. I think that the executive committee should really rethink this, because I think for the historical record of what went on at a certain county board meeting or a committee record should be established for posterity. Pick a topic within the last 5 years, maybe in 2016, and try to find that YouTube video of that exact happenings of that committee or that county board. You're going to have a hard time. And with just the specifics of the motion, the specifics of the roll call itself will not lend itself to what exactly happened at that county board. This county board makes a variety of big decisions throughout its history. And you can pick some within the last few years. And I think that to capturing the essence of the debate, capturing the essence of what happened, what the people said for the historical record, because historians are going to look back in 10 to 15 years at a variety of issues that we've looked at within the last few years and not find anything. And will you be depending on the record of the local paper? I don't think you're going to find that. I don't think you'll find that record like you did 20 years ago with the newspaper reporting that story. And I think that we're losing a lot of our history if we're going to say this motion, this roll call, without some kind of an evidence, without some kind of a debate, without some kind of a recording of what that debate looked like. Budget, a variety of other issues. And I think that the executive committee could look back on a variety of other issues within the last 20 years and see how minutes were taken. And I think just for the historical record, if nothing else, and not depending on YouTube, because you can ask Jerry, how long are those going to be out? How long will that serve as that historical record into the future? Because we're thinking of 50 years from now, if we wanted to see what the county board was referring to in the 1910s or the Great Depression with regard to how to fight the poor committees at that time, we go to the county board. We don't, and we know exactly what the county board was saying. We know the thrust of why they did what they did. And I think that I think there's other ways of dealing with the county board's minutes for the future to reflect that historical record. Thank you.
Two comments on that, and first, the clerk does receive a fixed CD copy, excuse me, of all of the recorded meetings. And the challenge becomes that, and historically this has happened, I've served on this board now 16 plus years, and I have seen the debate over the minutes and the discussion. I said this was not what I said. This is not exactly quoting me in the discussion that took place at a committee meeting. And so when somebody starts trying to recite in minutes the debate that took place, it's opened up for discussion. Now that the challenge of, well, that's not what I said, that's not what I intended, that's not what I meant, by somebody else writing down and not trying to keep exact wording. Supervisor Robinson.
I was going to cover the same thing that you did relative to the fact that we are capturing these on YouTube, and it is a much better reflection. And I think that it begs the question of how do we archive those and make those available in the future. I think Supervisor Gisselman raises a valid point on how do we capture it, but I think that the better way is through the recording of it. And I think one of the things that was talked about at the executive committee was bookmarking those recordings so that you don't have to go through the entire minutes, and you can jump to that section a minute and 40 seconds or whatever it is, or an hour and 40 seconds into it. But I think we have to look for ways to use technology to our advantage, and that would be the verbatim or the actual recording of the event.
Supervisor Stravinsky.
Thank you, Chair. Supervisor Robinson just addressed a little bit of what I was going to go on, and Supervisor Gisselman makes a very good point, and that is paper is paper is paper, and unless it deteriorates, I can go back. My background's engineering. I can go back to drawings that are 50 years old, and God help me, they're still the same. CAD systems, electronic, if it's 10 years old, we're sunk. And so he identifies a real issue, and that is how do we keep that technology relevant and actually be able to maintain that record 5, 10, 50, 100 years from now. And, so I think he identifies a real problem, and if we're going to go down this road, and I think we should, I think there's lots of advantages, we need to come up with a plan that accommodates the fact that we need to keep those digital records within Marathon County, not somewhere in a cloud, but under Marathon County board control or within the confines of the county organization, so that we retain control of that and have a plan by which we migrate them forward so that 50 years from now somebody can come back and actually use those records. Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think these are all valid concerns and complaints. I think we've talked about this at rules, and I think for the next time we meet for rules, which is usually the last 6 months of this committee, and start talking about that, I think that would be something we could review at that time. So if that's a good suggestion, and I think that would be the proper place to do it. Thank you.
One of the other things that the clerk has pointed out to me is every year the clerk does a record and a proceedings book that has the minutes from all the committees, all of the motions, all of the resolutions, all are in that proceedings book. But valid questions. Supervisor Langenhan is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my understanding of public records keeping is that minutes have to be kept in perpetuity. How does our records retention schedule in the county treat audiovisual recordings? Thank you.
I will refer that to Corp Counsel.
So depends what the recording is of. Recordings of county board or subordinate committee meetings, I'm sure are covered by a specific retention period. I don't off the top of my head know what that is, but I can send it around to the board after today's meeting.
Okay, any other questions? Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the mileage reimbursement process. And I put this on the agenda just to give a refresher and possibly update to all of the supervisors. As our rules state that any supervisor requesting reimbursement for mileage or any other expenses that they incur are to do so on a quarterly basis. And just reminding people that the rules also state that those reimbursements are to be submitted. Now, we allow for paper and or electronic version, but I wanted to give a brief demonstration on the electronic version because I've seen, since I am the one that has to approve those and forward those on, I just wanted to show some people some of the mistakes that are being done. And provide them the education that. So first off, again, when the link will be sent out by Kim to the reimbursement form, the electronic version of the reimbursement form, and it is in our form system called Laserfish. And simply, you type it, you open the link, you fill in your name, first name, last name, your employee number if you know it, and then you use the drop-down screens. Since you're a county board member, obviously you click on county board member, and that will be filled in. Then you go down to the next section. The next section will allow you to click on either a county board educational meeting, if you have voter meetings that you've attended, standing committee meetings, and you want to claim mileage for any of those, any other appointed meetings, townships association meetings. Then as you fill in, if you have multiple meetings, I guess this is the one point that I would share. If you have multiple educational meetings, so during that quarter, for example, the third quarter of 2022, you attended 2 educational meetings. You put in the date here first, you click on today's date, put in the number of miles that you traveled, in this case 25. You go down here and click on the mileage rate. Obviously, it is after July 1. The federal government changed the mileage rate to now 62.5 cents a mile. And it will calculate out the dollars that you're going to be reimbursed if approved. The next thing, if you have a second educational meeting, right below that, if you click add, it will give you another educational meeting. It should. And I didn't hit it right. So, okay, now you can put the next date or the next meeting, and let's say it was August's educational meeting, and I'm going to guess it was the 18th. Again, put in the mileage you want, mileage that you traveled, and then the mileage rate. And again, it will come up with, and you just continue to add the additional meetings for the same category that you started with. In this case, it is educational meetings. Then you can go, you only attended 2 of the educational meetings. Now you attended all 3 of the voters meetings. Again, go to the voters section, select the date. We'll say, well, again, the 27th, and you can't put in a future date, so I will choose and then again, the number of miles traveled and the rate, and then you can add the additional the voters meetings that you've attended. So you can put all 3 of the voters meetings in, then you can go to your standing committee meetings and you select the dates. Again, it's very intuitive. If you have other meetings that you've attended, boards or commissions, again, you use the drop down. Well, first off, in a standing committee, you can use the drop down. Which standing committees did you attend? Environmental resources, executive, whatever the committee was that you attended. Again, using the date. When you get to additional committee meetings, you can add additional committee meetings again for your next additional committee meetings that you've attended to. You can also then attend other meetings. Maybe it was the CWA board meeting or any other ones listed here. If you don't find it here listed, and it is in your official capacity as a supervisor and your appointment, then you can put down other and then describe what that meeting was. And then you can also go down to Towns Association meetings. If you've attended, in this case, multiple Towns Association meetings, you would add that. Then you've got the others, the other expenses. Now they have to be approved travel, other expenses. So for example, individuals that attended the WCA conference, they can put their approved travel. Yes, I've got other approved travel. Was it mileage? You can put down mileage, the date you traveled, miles traveled, rate again, selecting the rate, and the destination. Where did you travel to? From home to Wisconsin Dells, to the WCA conference. Once you have all of the meetings inputted on one form, you can then upload a copy of your insurance declaration sheet by just taking a picture of it and then uploading it here. It'll take you out and say, yep, that's the picture I want, and you can just double click on it. It'll upload it, and then after that, then you just need to go to the date and sign, and you can type in your name, and it will mark sign it and then submit it. It will then come to me. I'll review it, ensure that everything's in there is accurately, approve it, forward it to finance. It's really that simple. If you choose not to use the electronic version and you use the paper form, that's fine, but I still need a copy at this point of your insurance declaration. I then have to input all of that information into the same, the input screen, and then forward it to finance. So is there any questions on, again, they're supposed to be submitted by the 15th of the following month following the quarter. So the quarter ends, in this case, 9/30. Any mileage or any reimbursement request would and should be submitted by 10/15. Again, I'll have the clerk and or administrative assistant from the administrator's office forward out to all of the supervisors the link to the application. What's that?
It's been sent.
Okay. Any? You just submit it, and you'll receive an email that it has been submitted. So once you've hit submit, you can then either say print out a copy of it, and you can print out a copy for your own record, or you can say send me a copy of what I just submitted in an email, and it'll forward back. If you type in your email address, it will forward you back a copy of what you just submitted. Supervisor.
I got a question, Chair. Like if you attend a meeting, you're not on the committee. If you attend a meeting, can you put that on there too, or no?
You'd had to have that approved prior to attending. So again, you have to be attending in your official capacity. So unless you're assigned to that committee or you've requested the ability to attend that meeting for a specific purpose and it's tied to your official capacity, that would be a pre-approved mileage, but you have to be officially either on the committee or a pre-approval.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. And we will move on then to review and discussion on Tuesday meeting agenda items under ordinances. From Environmental Resources Committee, the Town of Holton rezone Irving Miller, ordinance 0-23-22. Any questions? Okay, moving on to item 9A2 from the town of Spencer, the village of Spencer, ordinance 24-22. Okay, moving on from the town of Spencer, item 9A3, Kevin Burt, ordinance 25-22. Any questions? And from moving on to resolutions from Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, item 9B1A, approval of the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, resolution 56-22. Any questions? Items 9B, 1B, a resolution to approve the 2023 capital improvement plan projects. We have the Deputy Administrator, Mr. Holman, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Supervisor Robinson mentioned in his report, I just want to note, as I did in the memo in your packet, that the HR Finance and Property Committee hasn't taken this up for their final determination, so that will be coming to you at your voting meeting, and any updates or changes to the materials you had in your packet will be brought to you at that time as well. So what you have before you today could ultimately change based on that committee's deliberations. But for tonight, I just wanted to walk through sort of the changes we've made to the the capital improvement planning process and be able to answer your questions. As you see, myself, I've been involved in this, and the facilities staff in the back, they're here as well to help answer your questions. So thanks to them for being here as well. So just a quick note on capital improvement history, because like many of you, I'm new to Marathon County, so it was important for me to understand where have we been with this. And historically, there was a CIP committee that was tasked with bringing these projects and related items to the county board. And within that, there was a ranking system that had been used for all projects, and that was utilized in a way that, at the end of the day, based on available funding, sometimes there were projects that might be considered end of life or generally higher priority from different perspectives that went unfunded, and then that would create a problem down the road because something would deteriorate to a point where now the cost for repairing it or something were further or beyond what was initially proposed in terms of addressing it. When that committee was dissolved, the responsibilities for capital improvement planning were transferred to the HR Finance and Property Committee. So as a part of that, the decision was also made to move away from the ranking system as it had been utilized and to change that process so that the staff, in this case myself and the facilities staff who are here tonight, would play a greater role in developing the plan and bringing it to the committee and the board so that you would ultimately receive an informed recommendation from staff that would give you a better starting point for the conversations that you want to have when it comes to this topic. So the process itself, if you follow around the little chain there, it starts when department heads submit project request forms to the facilities department. Those project forms have a variety of different categories that kind of explain the project, its nature, the funding, where might it be coming from, could be purely asking for tax levy or CIP funding. It could be some other external source of funding, whether that, like for example, highway sometimes will have federal or state funding associated with projects. Those projects are then reviewed and categorized by the facilities staff and myself. And by that, you'll see in the packet materials through the mandatory, recurring, end of life, different categories so that they end up in a tiered priorities list. The new projects that are within those, so outside of mandatory or compliance or end of life or recurring, those new projects, we did modify the ranking system that had been used historically so that we would have some sort of criteria with which to rank those projects so that we weren't just showing up with sort of an arbitrary mishmash of things for you to look at. And those criteria were also included in your packet, and I'll get back to those in a second. The administrator then will review the plan after those filters, if you will, were applied and makes any changes. Sometimes, maybe no changes, maybe a few tweaks here or there. Could be dropping a project or moving it to a future year. Then the committee would take it up and ultimately would get county board approval. That is relative as well to the projects only. And so you might have seen that reference throughout the materials in the sense that for September, we're just approving the project list. There's still the budget process playing out. And so as the funding allocation that is ultimately made available for CIP, we'll be able to say, okay, here's what the county board said was what they wanted in the way of projects. Here's the criteria we've established, and then the funding will be allocated based on priority. And then things could still change with that based on however much funding ends up at the end of that process. So then my point there is to say that though we're approving projects this month, the projects and allocated funding will come back to the committee and the board for final approval as part of that overall budget process. So what we have done, the requested projects from departments were categorized into the appropriate tiers, and you saw those in the packet. Some projects have already been pushed to future years. Some of those were the larger projects that would be sort of phased perhaps over 2 or 3 years, depending on the scope of the project. New projects, we ranked those with the criteria you saw. And all other projects were not ranked in a similar fashion because their priorities automatically established by the tiers that we created in terms of we have the mandatory things which we should address first. We have the end of life things like you got a hole in the roof or the roof is wearing thin or the carpet's wearing thin, so it's a tripping hazard, things like that. You have recurring funding such as IT costs or rolling stock vehicle replacements, things like that. And then the new categories, new projects that don't neatly fit into any of those tiers but could still be ranked on some of the same criteria, but just with a slightly different lens. Just a real quick point, some projects are not funded by CIP, but we do include them for the sake of transparency so that the public and yourselves can see how the assets that the county has extend beyond what would be considered a traditional CIP project. And also, I referenced this earlier, but some project requests may have a dollar figure associated with them that's not the entire amount. So the dollar figure would be what are they actually requesting from CIP to make the project whole. So I referenced a highway project earlier. There could be state, federal funding associated with that, maybe ARPA, and then an additional funding amount to make that project, whatever it would be, completely funded. So another, as a reminder, is that though we establish a CIP plan just as we establish the budget, these are both living and breathing documents that can change over time. The process for changing those varies based on where you are in the process, but I think it's just important to note that it's sometimes people will think of these things as static and immovable, and so there's like a greater weight that we feel like, oh, we're making a final decision on a budget or final decision on a CIP plan. You are able to change things along the way just by virtue of what you encounter in a given year. So a few considerations that I ran into as we were putting this together. The first one is just funding county plans, and the one that's in the plan tonight that you were seeing is the groundwater management plan. As I dug into CIP in general, the county does have a number of different plans that all require funding at some point in time when they're being updated, renewed, or maybe it's the first time we've ever done one. The cost can be really considerable depending on the scope of the project, so they don't typically fit neat within a department budget either, because if you're putting, say, $500,000 into a department budget one year, you can end up with some peaks and valleys in that department's budget over time, and it kind of distorts what you might look at least superficially. And so trying to figure out how to handle those in a way that we can still find the funding for those if we decide to do those plans, but also categorize them or treat them in a way that associates them with CIP perhaps, but not necessarily as a traditional CIP project is something that I've been thinking about, and I just offer it up as something for you to think about as well. And I listed a couple of things in terms of it's possible to fund them through CIP despite not being that neat fit. I've seen some counties have done it that way. There's also a way similar to vehicle replacement funds, and like I said, it's a gray area, but if you could establish a category within CIP or some other funding mechanism wherein you identify the plans that you want to continue having as a board, and then if one plan, for instance, costs $10,000 to renew and you need to update it every 10 years, you could put $1,000 towards it every year, and after 10 years, the funding's already there Nobody has to come back to anybody to ask for money because we already know that that's part of the plan for the plans. Similarly, with rolling stock and recurring funding, it should come as no surprise that the market changes. This year it's changed quite a bit, as we all know. And so giving some consideration, and we've heard this in different standing committees about how can we index or, what can we peg some of these amounts to so that the funding somebody receives for vehicle replacement, for instance, vehicles cost more and more and more. So if we give people funding to buy the car they bought in 1985, in 2023, they're not going to buy the same car. So what do we actually need for September? This is just part one of the process, as I mentioned. We're not approving any funding, and if you looked at the resolution's fiscal note, you'd see that, that there's no fiscal impact associated with it. It's just identifying the projects that the committee and board feel are worthy of moving forward and being considered when we get that end amount from the CIP, which is made available to fund the projects. The approved projects for that funding will come back to the committee and the board as part of that budget process. Our focus primarily is the 2023 capital budget. So there are multiple years in the packet that you saw. The later years are more forecasts for planning purposes, so we can kind of see the ebb and flow of projects. Some of them might be larger in scope. So if you're looking at something that costs far more than a traditional project, you would want to take into consideration where debt service is. How do you want to manage that in concert with the way you handle the county's infrastructure? So there's also things in terms of, are there projects for 2023 that you would want to drop from the plan for whatever reason, and we can have those discussions, or push them to a later year, or even identify as a project that should available funding not be there. Are they neater fits per se to move to another year than others? So that would be where facilities could come in and say, well, those chillers, we could probably push them for one extra year, but that roof needs to get done no matter what, that kind of conversation. So you free up funding through that sort of thing, again, based on available funding. Also, this is a point of interest for me, but also for administration and I think everybody involved in this. Are there things that are not included in what you're seeing now and next week that you'd like to see as we continue to improve the process for next year and beyond? So you've seen how we've started to move away, change the process, change how you see the projects, you see the criteria we're using, things like that. Are there bits and pieces of information that might be more useful to you as a part of that? We can certainly incorporate those. I'm also working on an updated CIP handbook to kind of talk about capital improvement planning just in general so that we understand what are the nuts and bolts of the process so anybody can pick it up and kind of see if they're completely unfamiliar with it, what it means. And also that 5-year outlook I think should take place in December, because after the budget's been adopted and we know the available funding and funding has been allocated, that forecasted project list will change because maybe there were projects that weren't funded. So we would want to include those and bump it up a year, for instance, so that you kind of tee up the conversation for the following year. And also kind of keep your thumb on the pulse of CIP just in general, because it really is an important part of what we do as a county. So the next steps, as I already mentioned, HR Finance and Property will make their final call next Tuesday. Those approved projects will populate the budget sheet. That was that spreadsheet that didn't have any dollar figures really assigned to it. That's the sheet that has been used historically to account for the way we allocate funding via Kayenta. So it's a bridge gap between Kayenta and the new Workday system, and also a bridge between the old way of doing CIP and the newer and hopefully evolving, this year and next way that we approach this topic. The county board deliberation and final approval will take place next Tuesday as well. We'll bring any updates from that committee to that meeting. And as I've said before as well, the October and November budget meetings will include those approved projects with the allocated funding. And the changes I'm referencing there at the last bullet is just to say that as the budget continues, we know the funding, we have the list, we may make some of those shifts along the way because the funding is not there. And we would still want to kind of intelligently approach that, right? Even though there might be a ranking associated with a new project, you would want to say, apply the funding in a very logical way so that you could handle the CIP and know that you're doing the best possible thing you can with what you've got to work with. So if those changes do occur, obviously we'll highlight those as well. And ultimately, when you see the final budget, that will be a part of it. So in the packet, I'll just walk through some of the materials you received, just so you can understand exactly what I'm pointing to in my comments. These 2 pages here, I wanted to include those again to give you an idea of what did we actually use when we sat down and talked about the new projects in terms of criteria. And this is a modified version of what was used historically, but we only use those for the new projects. And so the scores that the new projects got were reflected based on our determination and kind of deliberation as staff about each one of them and how they applied. And so the raw scores for those projects are in the actual spreadsheet, though may not be accessible through the packet. But if, for instance, if you wanted to see the raw scores of new projects in relation to this criteria, we can certainly provide that. This sheet here is the budget sheet I was mentioning. So you see that there's some at the top projects are not planned by CIP. These are projects that are not going to get CIP funding, but they're still considered part of the county's fixed assets. And roads are a great example because a lot of times people don't think of roads as being a fixed asset for the county, but they're probably the most valuable and high-cost asset that the county has to maintain above anything else. Then there's recurring projects. Technology projects are carved out for CCITC. There's the rolling stock section, which was also reflected in the spreadsheet that you received. And then there's the list of new projects. And there's an updated form of that will be in the HR packet as well for next week. In terms of the spreadsheet itself, this was just our attempt to categorize everything based on what I've been saying. The project type key here, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what each of those letters meant when they saw them in the sheet, and also that there's an associated priority with each of those tiers. The top of the page is some of the enterprise funds, so like the solid waste, they've got their own projects, so those are funded through their mechanism and their board and process, but we include them here for information only. Similarly, on the highway here, there was a paving program entry in the spreadsheet, but after talking with Commissioner Griesbach, Christie, and Administrator Leonard, we determined that it made sense to pull that out because really a lot of that funding is tied to the bituminous operations, which is a recurring funding piece that's located further in a document, further down a document. The park plan here, the park design, that's at a point where the board hasn't, the committee or the board hasn't finally approved anything. And so it didn't make sense to assign a dollar figure to that now, but it is something that's in progress as we speak. And so it made sense to keep it in there and note that there could be a consideration as a 2023 project upon board approval of a master plan should it come to you before the end of the year. The 2 red categories here, these are the mandatory projects. The demolition of the cold storage is something that sort of lingered for some time, but we're now at a point where we're not going to be allowed to not demolish it. So that's why it's mandatory. Similarly, with the Marathon Parks, you've already approved funding for the design of changing the way the water is handled at the park. That water system compliance is funding that's associated with the implementation of that improvement for the water lines that you've heard about previously. The E category, the end of life, I tried to be brief but clear in terms of what each of the projects were. Certainly we can answer any of the questions you have there. I will point out that there were 2 UWSP projects that there are still a lot of open questions about what is the county and university going to do with some of the buildings we have there, because we're not quite sure about the future of them. So we moved some of the projects forward to 2024 to provide space for those conversations to happen so that we're not allocating funding towards something that may ultimately not even be a county building. But the ones that were in there are fire alarm systems, so logically something you'd want to upgrade just from a public safety point of view, and also the roof replacement. And if anybody's had a bad roof, they know why that's listed as well. There's courthouse improvements. There's another roof replacement for the South Courthouse. I tried to flesh out all the acronyms, even though this one is still pretty complicated. but nevertheless, it's still important to try to demystify some of those if possible. Air handling units, phone replacements, even replacing your iPad or laptops based on where the project goes. I carved out the ARPA section because some of the projects that have been brought to you were requested by Administrator Leonard to be moved into the end this body to be moved into the CIP plan as consideration there. The top three there are all from parks. The bottom five I carved out separately because this board's already encumbered funds with the ARPA funding for the eventuality if we did get those projects funded through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I did note that the County Road K, Decatur Drive to North County line, that one has been funded for 2023. We've been waiting for feedback to see which others have been approved. I think there was another one recently, but I don't know. That might have just happened in the last couple of days. Nevertheless, the funding has already been encumbered, so I treated it separately so that you could see it would be distinct from the rest. The recurring projects, I separated some of these because you've got the traditionally recurring projects where you've, like parking lot fund, that's something that's every year. The bituminous surfacing, I referenced that earlier. That's actually not CIP funding. That would most likely be tax levy for the most part. But still, it's important to see what that funding amount is. You've got the playground replacement funding. You'll see that if you looked into forecasted years, that's there every year because the board has set that as a recurring fund as well. Same thing for the restroom improvements, road repairs, and then there's the recurring PC replacement, et cetera, for CCITC. These two I carved out because they're vehicle replacement. And then the blue category were all the new projects that made it to this point. And so on the far left, you see the ranking 1 through 8. There's a couple that have 8 based on the raw score being the same. And that if the allocated funding got to this point and we had $500,000 left, then that first project would be the one funded based on this criteria as it stands today. Obviously, the committee and the board have the final say there, but again, it's important that what we bring to you has some objective analysis brought to it. It's informed by our conversations with departments and ourselves and finance to figure out what makes the most sense, and I referenced the criteria we used earlier. So the two totals down here, the $8 million number is the total amount for requested projects. Again, we're not approving funding, but it's still there for context. And then I included the total amount that includes the money that you've already encumbered for the highway projects. So that ultimately is sort of the focus plan, that 2023 capital plan that will be folded into the budget for next year. I can quickly scroll through the other years. For now, I've been trying to even put placeholders for a mandatory project just so that we're seeing the same thing through each year. And then as these changes are made, we would populate the plan moving forward. We already know what some of these are. Again, these aren't necessarily all happening in 2024. After that December meeting I referenced, my intention would be to say, this is what the budget approval was. This is how that changed the CIP planning. That's what it looks like now. And then we would kind of bump 24 up into the sort of focus that we just went through for 2023. And that would tee up the conversation for the following budget cycle. So I just categorize those through there. Really, these are just, again, not something we need to dig into, but are still things that are on our radar. And again, that's the point of the planning process. If you can really get a good tool in place, it allows you to not only be very aware of all your infrastructure needs, but begin to plan around them based on available funding, based on things that you may want to borrow for, impacts of debt service levy, impacts of the budget, all those things you can plan for much better if you have a tool like this that can inform those decisions over time. So I'll leave it at that for now. But if you have any questions, I certainly am happy to answer them. Any specific questions too, the facilities guys are here that they can give you some more information.
Chris, maybe you could touch on just a little bit on the 4 different areas that you have for funding when we get to the funding. I know it's not in part of this resolution, but how the CIP is created, bonding, ARPA, and then also the potential of reserves if it ever went that far.
Sure. So the CIP funding is an amount that we get informed of from finance based on monies that are made available from post-audit calculations. That's the purest sense of CIP funding that then gets carved out through some of those automatically recurring funding pieces that I referenced earlier. Now, I also mentioned that if we only had $500,000 left, you would only fund that first project of the new projects. But potentially you could run out of funding in an end-of-life category. And at that point, and let's just say hypothetically, you had some serious issues that you really needed to address, that's when you could consider other funding mechanisms, whether that be borrowing, either long-term or short-term, depending on the scope of the project. Could be using reserves to fill a gap or to fund a project. Again, it would be based on need. You would see it and we would be able to explain it in great detail in terms of why it's end of life and why you can't push it another year. I think I'm answering your question there in terms of funding. In as far as I'm not sure, what was the first part of your question?
Exactly, how the CIP funding is actually created, and you've answered that.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions for Chris? Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And next we have from Infrastructure Committee, item 9B2A, the 2022 Marathon County Bridge and Culvert Aid Resolution, Resolution 58-22. Any questions? All right, we are down to announcements and/or requests. Supervisor Robinson.
The Broadband Task Force will be meeting next Monday, and one of our speakers will be talking about the move from 4G to 5G and what that means for many of you that are having your phones upgraded and don't have service. If you're available at 3 o'clock on Monday, you might want to attend.
Other announcements and/or requests? Okay. We're down to the famous one, item number 11. What is your pleasure? We have a motion by Supervisor Vensky and a second by Supervisor Seefeld to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of adjournment, please vote on your machine. Now the clerk informs me it's a voice for vote. So all those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.